Hello, and welcome to Reading a Light Plot for THR111. Hopefully this video will be quick. I'm just going to go over how to generally read a light plot to kind of um, just kind of give you an overall sense of how we use them in the theater. Um, so this is just a kind of a practice light plot, right? This isn't really a specific space. Now, if we were in room 10, I would say this is kind of would be a good light plot for room 10, but we're not in there. So hopefully this will kind of give you an idea. And feel free to reach out if you need more explanation as to how this works. So I'm going to start with the actual kind of plot area. So this is our actual plot, and I'll get into these in a minute. So this is our actual plot. And the first thing I want to point out is our pipes. So if you remember me talking about the last video, we have what we call battens. Now this is kind of a small space area, so these would really just be pipes that are they're in the ceiling and they don't really go anywhere. And we refer to this as a grid system, right? Because it's just kind of a giant grid if you look up. This is pretty typical in black box spaces, if you think. We divide them up by certain names to kind of give them to give where we're hanging lights a location, right? Now in a traditional proscenium arch, we would really just have, if you look onto the right side, we would just have our electrics. Because it's a grid, we have our electrics on down here too. But typically you'll just see electrics, right? If you remember me talking about electrics, it's really just the pipe or batten that it's on. So usually the electrics are just numbered, right? Just from first to six. And usually it goes from the bottom up, right? Because the first electric would be nearest to the audience, and the sixth would be the further down the stage. That's how it's usually numbered. So in a traditional space, you would see these like that. But because we have our grid system, we have ones that are named after letters as well to kind of to tell the difference between the two. So right, so we have our electric A, B, C, D, E, F. So each of these has a certain pipe that it's on, right? So this is the sixth electric, and this is the electric F. So if I was saying, you know, what kind of light is on electric A, right? So this is electric A, and I'd say, oh, it looks like a source 4. So there's just one light on electric A, right? And then the same thing. Now we don't really hang lights kind of in these cross pieces. That wouldn't really make sense. Everything's usually just on one electric. So yeah, and then to kind of go over, so there is a standard for how each light is kind of drawn. If you remember me talking about instruments, we have our pretty typical types of instruments, and every plot has an instrument key, which we see over here, right? And it tells you what kind of instrument is in this certain plot, right? And it'll show you how it's drawn. Now, if it looks unfamiliar, there is usually an instrument key where you can go in and look, right? So I'll go in, look at the instrument key and see, okay, so this plot has source 4s, right? It has a Fresnel, and it has pars, right? If you remember pars being the big, we call them par cans because they look like big cans. And if you remember me talking about degrees and barrels, right? So we have different source 4s with different degree barrels, and it has it specified here, and it has also written on the actual light itself, right? So we have a source 4 with a 50-degree barrel, and if we go over here on electric F, you can see that there is a source 4 light with a 50-degree barrel in it. And then similarly to 36 degrees, right? So we have our source 4 to 36 degrees. And then if we go over, we can see, oh, we got our Fresnels right here drawn, and our par cans, right? So that's everything. And usually a light has an attachment like a gobo or a color scroller in this instance, right? It'll be under accessories, and it'll have its own drawing as well. And you can see that there is a color scroller on these two, on these two par cans. So we have all our types of instruments. And then I'm going to go over to this legend key. So you can see that there's all this just kind of junk written around the certain lights, right? And it's like, what the heck is that? So usually it'll have a legend key with it as well. So all of those have an important purpose of what it's trying to tell us. So the first one at the top you can see is a focus area. And so I guess I should talk about focus areas before I really kind of mention what is on the legend. So when a designer is designing for a space, they will usually lay out focus areas. And in this case, we only have 2 focus areas. So let's say this is like a 2-person, 1-act play, right? And they're not really going anywhere on stage. They're just sitting on a park bench or something like that, right? So we'd only need 2 focus areas. Now, if it was a big musical, there might be oh man, I don't know, like 15 focus areas. But in this sense, I'm just trying to hopefully give you an understanding of what a focus area is. So this would be an actual place on stage, and we give them letter number or letters to kind of tell what they are. So you can see it's this focus area is called A, and this focus area is called B. And this would be on the actual stage. Um, and this is useful because, say, a lighting designer is present in a focus, we could just go, oh, that goes in focus area A. So if we know where it is on the plot, then we can just point it where it is. So if I go back to the legend, you can see that the focus area is at the top, very top of the light. Very top of the light. So let's see, we got them down at the bottom here, right? So this source 4 right here on the first electric, right? The first electric looks like it has a bunch of lights on it. So this light over here, if we look at the very top, it's focused on focus area A, which is right here, right? Now, for the sake of organizational purposes, all of these lights are just put at a straight line, just so it's easier to look at. You can point them if you want your focus areas, but it just makes everything look messy. So it's good to have that located on the actual light to know, okay, so this light is actually pointed at A. Now, if I go underneath the focus area on the legend, that gives us our color, right? And that's our gel color usually. So it looks like this has an RO2, which is just right. That's just the brand of what kind of gel is in there, which happens to be a Roscoe. So that's our gel color that's in there. If we go under that, we go to our unit number. So you can see that every light has a number in the middle of it. So that's our unit number, and that's how we find a light on an electric. And unit numbers go from, which is really is foreign to us, but it goes from right to left, not left to right. So the unit number is used for troubleshooting. So if we say, oh, this light isn't coming on, we could say, oh, well, where is it? And say it's the third instrument on the first electric, right? So the third instrument on the first electric would be this guy, right? So it's just a way for us to find lights where they are in the physical space, and help just organize things in general. So, and if we go underneath, we can see that there's some shapes with some numbers in them as well. So that has our channel and our dimmer number. If you remember, a dimmer is where we're just plugging in the light, right? Think of the dimmer as kind of the wall outlet. So we're plugging in the light. So it looks like if we go to electric F, this one source 4 right here is plugged into dimmer 7, right? So that's just plugged into dimmer 7. And then we go underneath that, that is the channel number. So that's what we're assigning this light in the board in order to control it. So it's plugged into dimmer 7 and it's channel 6, right? So that's how we read the legend. So hopefully that all makes sense. And then lastly, we have our title block. Now the title block on this specific plot is ginormous, just so you can kind of get the idea. So the title block is just to show what the heck this plot is used for, right? So it'll have the title of the show, the theater company, the name of the theater, so where this is being done, the director, right, who's directing the play, the designer who's designing it, the ALD or draftsperson, right? When we talk about assistant lighting designers, a lot of the time the assistant lighting designers are actually drawing the light plots themselves, because if it's a ginormous show, one person doing a giant musical, it can take a really long time. So they kind of divide that up, divide and conquer, if that makes sense. And then the master electrician, right, the person who's kind of executing this design, right, who's plugging everything and hanging everything. And then we have our plate number, which is it's pretty typical in lighting design to really only have one page, right? This is just a fancy way of saying what page is this. So if there was 2 pages of this, it would say plate number 1 of 2 or plate 2 of 2, right? And then our scale, if you learned about this in scenic design, scale references how big this drawing is into actual life, if that makes sense. So if it would be, half an inch equals a foot, quarter of an inch equals a foot, right? Usually in lighting, we're not really too specific about where lights are specifically being hung in terms of scale. So we don't really worry about scale as much in lighting design other than to make sure everything's fitting on the page. But again, that depends on your type of designer, if they're stricter about scale and stuff like that. And then finally have our date. So Yeah, and I guess, well, the last thing I forgot to mention is you probably noticed um, that these two par cans up here, they kind of have eights under them quite a bit. So this is what we call twofering, and it's just a fun way of saying that we're plugging two lights into the same dimmer. And it's shown like this, and it happens actually a lot more common than you would think because sometimes we'll have more lights than we do places to plug it into. So we'll have to twofer a lot of things, which is shown here, right? So these two lights are both plugged into dimmer 15, and they share the same channel because we just want to bring them up at the same time. Then they might have different colors in them, but we want to bring them up at the same time. So that's why we would twofer them like that. So great. So that's generally how to read a plot. Now some are a little more complicated than this, but hopefully this gives you an overall um, uh, uh, general feeling of how to read a plot. Cool. Thank you.